Your son's got a sleeve. Your daughter's got something down her arm she still hasn't fully explained to you. The nephew went and got his whole neck done and acted like that was normal. And you, the man who helped raise half of them, you don't have a single mark on you. Never did. I'm Franklin, and I want to talk to the black men your age who never got a tattoo. Not the man who's mad about them. Not the man who lectures about them at the barbecue. The man who's quiet about it. The man who looked at the whole thing for 40 years, felt the pool more than once, and is still walking around with skin as clean as the day he was born, and who, if you put him on the spot, couldn't fully tell you why. It wasn't fear. Let's get that off the table early. You weren't scared of a needle, and it wasn't that you were square or behind or didn't get it. You got it fine. You had specific reasons, and those reasons are tied directly to being a black man who came up exactly when you came up. Most people have never heard those reasons said out loud, so let's say them. Start with what you actually do, because the behavior tells on you before the explanation does. You are not a man who avoids tattoo shops. That's the part folks get wrong about you. You've been inside plenty of them. You drove your daughter to her appointment and sat in the chair by the wall, reading the flash, watching the needle, asking the artist more questions than she did. You've priced your own out in your head 100 times. You know exactly what you'd get. You know exactly where it'd go. For a lot of you, it's a name and a date, somebody who's not here anymore, and you walked out with nothing. Again. That's not a man who can't make up his mind, a man who can't decide flip-flops. You're not flip-flopping. The answer was already no a long time ago, and every trip to that shop was you quietly checking to see if the no had loosened up any. It never did. So where did no that strong come from? You have to go back and remember what a tattoo even meant when you were a young man. Not what it means now. What it meant then. When you were 18, 20, 22, ink wasn't a personality. It told people something specific about your life. There were really only 3 kinds of men walking around marked up back then. You had the military man, the Navy especially, and his ink was earned, an anchor or a unit or a ship's name, and everybody respected it because everybody knew what it cost to get it. You had the man who done a bid, and his tattoos were a record of where he'd been and sometimes who he'd been there with. And you had the streets, where the ink could tell you who a man ran with before he said a word. Self-expression wasn't on that list. Putting a butterfly on your shoulder because it spoke to you, that idea didn't exist in your world yet. Sociologists actually tracked when that shift happened. For most of the last century, tattoos in this country lived in what one researcher called deviant careers, prison, gangs, the margins. It wasn't until the 1990s that regular middle-class folks slowly started claiming tattoos for graduations and weddings and new babies. And by the time that shift finished settling in, you were already a grown man with the meaning of ink locked in from a whole different era. So the wiring was set before the world changed the rules. Hold on to that, because it explains the rest of this. Now here's a reason almost nobody talks about, and it's a real one. The skin. You're a black man, and tattooing dark skin is genuinely a different craft. People who run platforms for tattooed women of color have said it flat out. A lot of artists never bothered to learn how to work on darker skin. Different needles, different shading, bolder lines because the fine, delicate stuff that shows up clean on a pale arm can blur and disappear on yours. Plenty of the bright colors a white client picks off the wall just heal muddy or vanish on melanin-rich skin. So a lot of black folks get steered straight to black and gray whether they wanted that or not. So picture you at 25 walking into the only shop in town. The man behind the counter has done maybe a handful of clients who look like you. Some part of you clocked that. Maybe you saw a partner come back with something that healed nothing like the picture. The color gone cloudy, the lines spreading. And you thought, I'm not paying good money to be somebody's practice. That's not insecurity. That's the same instinct that makes you ask 3 barbers questions before you let a new one near your head. You weren't about to gamble your one and only skin on a man who didn't really know how to work it. You ever notice you can't actually remember deciding all this? That's because you never sat down and decided. It got decided in 100 small rooms, and you just carried the verdict. Then there's the part that sits underneath everything else for a man your color. The world was already reading your body before you opened your mouth. You knew that early. The security guard who found a reason to follow you. The woman who switched her purse to the other shoulder. The cab that kept rolling. You ran that math every day without anybody asking you to. And here's the number that made it sharper than most people understand. By the early 1990s, when you were a young man, The federal government's own statisticians estimated that a black man had better than a 1 in 4 chance of going to prison at some point in his life. At the worst of it, that estimate climbed to 1 in 3. So when the wider world looked at a marked up black man and quietly thought, fresh out, that wasn't paranoia you invented. That was a real misread waiting to happen, attached to real odds, with real consequences for how a stranger decided to treat you. A tattoo, fair or not, was one more thing that could get you sorted into a box before you said hello. A lot of men looked at that trade and said, no thanks, not out of fear, out of arithmetic. You were already carrying enough weight on the outside. You weren't going to add to it on purpose. Which brings us to the job, and the job was no joke. Here's something most people genuinely don't know. Tattoos are not a protected class. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act protects you on race, color, religion, sex, national origin. It says not one word about ink, which means an employer can legally tell you to cover up or pass on you entirely because of a tattoo, as long as the rule goes for everybody. That is still the law today. Now run that through a man raised by people who lived through Jim Crow. People who drilled into you that you had to be twice as good and give them 0 reasons. You weren't about to hand a hiring manager a freebie. You weren't going to let a thing on your forearm be the reason you didn't get the call back for a job you needed to keep the lights on. So even the men who wanted ink made a deal with themselves. If I get it, it goes somewhere a dress shirt covers it. And then a whole lot of those men got to the next thought. If I'm going to hide this thing for the rest of my working life anyway, what exactly am I paying for? And they never booked the appointment. That's a quiet kind of math, but it kept a lot of forearms empty. And we still haven't gotten to your mother. Because for a good number of you, it wasn't the streets and it wasn't the job. It was the fact that you knew, without even testing it, exactly what would happen if you walked into Sunday dinner marked up. You could hear it. You could hear the exact pitch of her voice. And underneath her voice was the church. If you grew up in a church-going house, somebody put Leviticus on you. Do not cut your bodies or put tattoo marks on yourselves. And if it wasn't Leviticus, it was 1 Corinthians. Your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. You are not your own. You heard that as a boy and it lodged in deep. Now, preachers argue about those verses to this day. Plenty of pastors will tell you that Leviticus line was about old pagan mourning rituals and doesn't bind a Christian the same way. But you didn't get the seminary breakdown. You got the kitchen version. The version with the wooden spoon in her hand. And the kitchen version ends the conversation a lot faster than any Bible study ever could. So by 25, you've got a stack of no's. The world that'll read it wrong. The odds that made being read wrong dangerous. The job that can legally hold it against you. And the mother whose face you can picture without even dialing her number. You only needed one of those. You had all of them. But I told you this man felt the pull. So let's talk about the moments the no almost cracked. Because it cracked more than once. The first real one came in the late 90s and early 2000s, and it came through the culture. You turned on a basketball game and there was Allen Iverson. Cornrows, tattoos down both arms, chains, the whole thing. Playing his heart out, an MVP, one of the most electric men to ever touch a court. And for the first time, you were watching a black man wear his ink like armor, like pride, like power. And a little voice in you said, maybe it's different now. Maybe I had it read wrong this whole time. And then you watched what happened next. You watched the same league turn around in 2005 and write a dress code aimed straight at him. No chains, no do-rags, no throwbacks. You watched grown commentators call that man a thug for how he looked, while he was out there being one of the best in the world. Iverson said it himself years later. It taught him young what stereotyping really was. So here's the trap you were sitting in. The culture finally showed you a black man wearing ink with power, and in the very same breath, showed you that same man getting punished for how his black body looked. Both things at once. And the older voice in you, the careful one, quietly said, see, that's exactly what I've been telling you. And you kept your sleeves empty. The second crack was the deep one, and it's the one that still gets a lot of you today. Somebody died. Your mother, a brother, a child, God forbid. And the urge came up hard and fast. Put his name on me. Put her date on me. Carry them on my skin so they're never not with me.
The research backs how strong that pull is. When people do get tattoos, the number one reason by a wide margin is to honor or remember somebody, almost 7 in 10. And you felt every ounce of that. You might have gotten as far as picking the font, and then you stopped. Because some men hold their grief in a place that doesn't want strangers looking at it. You didn't want somebody in the checkout line pointing and asking who that was. You didn't want to hand your dead over to people who never knew them. So you carried that person another way, in your wallet, in a story you tell at the right table, in the way you do a certain thing exactly the way they taught you to do it. The love was never in question. The display was the question. And you answered no to the display. You hear what runs through all of this? Every single time, the pull was real. And every single time, something older and more careful than the pull held the line. So the question everybody eventually asks you, are you ever actually going to get one? Be honest with yourself. The numbers already know your answer. Among folks who don't have a tattoo, around 85% say they're not likely to ever get one. And the older you get, the more locked in that is. The young folks are still on the fence, but men your age have mostly closed the book quietly. You're not on the fence. You're the man who's going to keep saying, I might, one day, for the next 20 years, and everybody who loves you already knows one day is just a polite way of saying no without the argument. And you know what? That's allowed. Now hear me right. I'm not up here telling you ink is bad. It's not. A tattoo can be the most meaningful thing on a person's whole body, and plenty of brothers your age finally got theirs at 50 and loved them down to the bone. If that door is still one you want to walk through, it's more open now than it has ever been. For a lot of you, your mother's not at that dinner table anymore. The job math has shifted. There are artists now, good ones, who know exactly how to make your skin look like the masterpiece it is. The world moved. But if you're the man who never did it, I don't want you carrying that like something you fumbled. You didn't fumble anything. You made a read on a world that was reading you first. You made it young, with the information you had, in a body that this country treated a particular way. And you held that read for 40 years, through every pressure that came at you sideways trying to move it. That is not a man who couldn't make up his mind. That is one of the most consistent decisions you have ever made in your life. You were doing risk management nobody handed to the man sitting next to you. He could put anything on his arm, and the worst he'd catch was a bad review at Thanksgiving. You were calculating jobs and judgments and odds and a mother's heart, all at once, every time, for a thing other men got to treat as a fun afternoon. The clean arms weren't you being old-fashioned. They were a strategy, and the strategy worked. You got everywhere you got with no stranger ever getting to decide
who you were off a mark on your skin. So next time somebody at the cookout grabs your bare arm and asks how a man your age never got a single tattoo, you don't owe them the 40-year version. You can just hand them their plate back and tell them the truth. You thought about it. Plenty. You just always figured your skin had already been through enough conversations with strangers without you starting another one. That's all for today. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you soon. Peace.